Okay, now we're on your big one. Number 3, the argument from evil. Let me hear it.
Okay, well, I think there's some bad things in the world. I don't do think, okay, right? But I think the Holocaust was not a great idea, okay? I think the tsunamis that killed, I think around 300,000 people in India, that was not a good idea, okay, right? And so there are things that I think that you and I would change or prevent if we had the knowledge and power to do so. You and I would have prevented the tsunami. You might have given Hitler a little stroke or, changed him into a, laid-back hippie and so on. He wasn't interested in killing 6 million people.
A successful painter.
Okay. So the question is, if it's okay in the case of human beings to draw conclusions from what they do and what they allow to happen, okay, and you say, let's suppose that there's an all-powerful, all-knowing being, then why can't we draw probable conclusions from what that being does or does not do, right? And so the idea is, if you look at the sorts of things that are allowed, things that you and I would have prevented if we could have, right? Then the idea is it's reasonable to conclude that any being that allows that is not morally perfect.
But doesn't that create God in our image that puts our moral conscience or sense into the mind of God and assumes that that's the way things have to be? Wouldn't the God who created everything that we know and that gets more enormous with each passing year as we discover about the universe, would that God have a vaster, grander purpose in which the evils that we think are very horrible now are just part of some vast, grand scale that have to be part of the complexity of the world?
Well, the grand scale can involve various things. You can imagine a deity who was, just to speak, aesthetically oriented, right, and was trying to create a beautiful canvas and so on, and, suffering and so on all fitted into that sort of picture, okay? If that's the case, I would say, yeah, that sort of God is a possible deity, right? But he isn't a God that's going to answer to fundamental human hopes, okay? He provides no reason at all for thinking that evil will in the end be defeated and the good will triumph. He provides no reason at all for thinking that death is not going to be the end of our existence and so on, right? So it doesn't answer to the fundamental hopes that people have. So that sort of deity, I think, though interesting and a possibility, is not going to be appealing from a human point of view.
I think to make sense out of that argument, you have to have the God who is the aesthetic God who is drawing this beautiful canvas also add something after death, because only through an eschatology that has people living beyond death can you rectify on an individual basis the horrible nature of this life. You'd have to add that in.
Okay, but the question is what justification you have for adding that sort of thing in, okay, right? There are various reasons why you might think that we survive death. If we had immaterial minds or souls, then that would be a reason.
I'm not arguing that. All I'm saying is that in order for the theist to drive that argument to its conclusion, you are forced to come to the conclusion that there must be something after death, because then because without that, none of the rest of the arguments hold.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that if humans don't survive death, then there's no hope at all of answering the argument from evil, right? But I think even if they do, it's deeply problematic, okay? If you consider, for example, children who are tortured and suffering enormously, right? The question is, what reason could there be for allowing that to happen? And simply saying, that after death things are going to be made better doesn't seem to me to be a satisfactory answer. Right? The child could enjoy a good afterlife without undergoing the torture experience before death.
Totally agree. The question is can the world be so structured to enable human beings to be the kind of free will, character-building entities that will progress to this afterlife? That's the argument. And that there has to be the capability in the world for all of these different forms of evil. But that on an individual basis, the people who have suffered the worst of the evil will at least be given not only justice, but recompense in the next life.
Well, the idea that, the evils in the world serve the purpose of sort of character building or soul making is a very common idea, okay, right? But I think if you look at the world, it doesn't seem to be a good world even by those sorts of standards, okay, right? You have people who are really quite unpleasant individuals who live lives of luxury and ease and so on, right? You have young children who suffer and die before they've any chance to develop their character.
Certainly so, but this is part of the world as it exists. This allows its complexity, its richness, but that child who suffered and that person who supposedly benefited from the evil, there'll be some recompense, some justice in the world to come. I mean, that's the only way to give the argument consistency. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying to give consistency, you need that.
Yes, that's absolutely right. But I mean, I'm saying that even if you have those sorts of goals,
it's still not good enough for you.
Not good enough. The world can still be different and achieve those goals more effectively.
Okay, let's go to number 4, the hiddenness of God.
Okay, well, the basic idea here is that the existence of God is not exactly as evidence the existence of, chairs and people and so on, right? And this is, of course, illustrated by the fact that many people have serious doubts about the existence of God, right? And so the starting point of the argument is to, first of all, to say that the existence of God could be much more evident than what it is, and one needs to explain that in detail, and then to argue that it'd be a good thing if the existence of God were more evident than what it is, right? And so that's basically the structure of the argument of the hiddenness of God.
But wouldn't that create a very rote, mechanistic society where God was so prevalent and so certain that everybody would have the same happy smile on their face? Maybe in some ultimate world, that's the way it'll be. But I, for one, wouldn't be all that comfortable in such an absolute mechanistically controlled world where everybody had the same greeting with each other and God was there. I mean, I'm not sure it would give me an opportunity to explore myself, even if I go in wrong directions sometimes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you're maybe thinking of a very heavy-handed God, right, who's going to be on top of you all the time, right? But, I mean, take the idea of being perfectly good in the way we normally understand it when we apply, a lesser idea to people, right? And think of the virtues that people have, like a sense of humor and so on, right?
Right.
God is not often portrayed as having a sense of humor, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think he does, but that's a separate issue.
That's right. And people think if you say, gee, God, you don't exist, he says, gee, Michael, go to hell, right? Okay. God could have a sense of humor, right? And not be offended by those sorts of things, right? And yet be heavy-handed, right? And so, God might say to you, I don't think that's a good thing for you to be doing. I think you should reconsider the line of the following sorts of things and so on, right? If you said, well, my plan is actually to kill a large number of people, he would say, well, now, I'm afraid that's not something you're going to get away with, okay, right? But I think there'd be tremendous scope for individuality, and people could develop or not develop in various ways, okay?
So you could have a possible world in which God was much more evident, everybody knows, but not heavy-handed, so that would be your kind of God, if it existed, would operate that kind of world, as opposed to a world where the existence of God was very problematic, because you're a smart guy, I respect you very much, and you don't believe in God. And so, from my point of view, is that your fault or God's fault? I mean, your point is that that's God's fault. He could have made himself less hidden to where you have nothing against God. You, I think, probably like to have a God so you could live forever and all that sort of stuff.
That's right, yeah. I mean, like a lot of people, there's a book on the hiddenness argument, okay, and a lot of people in the book argue, in effect, that people intentionally blind themselves, okay, intentionally turn themselves in the face of God and so on. I think what's going on here is the idea that if there's a God, we'll know that there's a moral law and so on that's enforced, right? And so there's certain things we will not get away with, right? And the argument seems to be that, you'll have more trouble, committing adultery and so on, right? Now, if you say, which would you prefer, the world where you can commit adultery without someone, punishing you, right? Or a world where you have a chance to live forever, right? That's an easy choice, right? Yeah. And so it seems to me that you ought to be very attracted to the idea that God exists. And so the idea that people intentionally blind themselves to the existence of God seems to be very implausible, right?
Okay, Michael, 4 arguments why God does not exist. Which is the big one?
The argument for evil, definitely.
And I haven't asked you this. Are you an atheist or agnostic?
I'm an atheist. I think the existence of God is very unlikely.
Very unlikely, but I don't hear 0.
No, I'm happy it's not 0, but it's very low indeed.